working around the executive team that I got to come up under, it was incredible to see how good they were at being driven and nimble at the same time and understanding like successes and failures and blockers and all those things and being adaptive to that. And if you feel that way, you're probably doing something right. Like good, wonderful, strong business teams recognize when they are or aren't making their goals and are adaptive to that process. And that hum, when you get it, when you get a team like that, those are the places you will hear people tell stories of working somewhere like that for the rest of their life.
This is Slackers, unscripted business insight from two lifelong builders. Jamie and Jonathan are here to show you how big ideas travel across industries. Consider it your weekly companion on the path to better work and a better way of working.
Okay, let's talk about being stuck. Not early stage chaos, not we need more ideas. I mean a heavier version of stuck. You are shipping the work. You're still having the meetings. The roadmap, it's on the whiteboard, but nothing meaningful is moving. Every builder hits this. Usually it's not laziness. It's often the system that got you here doesn't quite work anymore. And that's subtle, right? At higher levels, stuck doesn't always look super dramatic. It can kind of just look like maybe some team was misaligned and didn't do their thing that they were supposed to do. So teams will push harder, more urgency, more analysis, but that is not often the constraint. And a real risk is that you start to normalize it. So today we are unpacking what it really takes to get unstuck at a product level, at a leadership level, and at a systems level. To do that, we've got Aric Marshall with us. Aric spent 15 years in Apple product, helped lead category-defining work in audio, including AirPods and HomePod, and now works with companies at critical inflection points through his firm, Ronan. Aric, it is great to have you, man. You look good. Before we dive in, just give us a little bit more context on your personal journey, how you got here, and I would love to start with this. When someone tells you, hey, we might be stuck, what's usually the first thing that you are looking for?
Well, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me here. And thanks for telling everyone that I look good for our audio audience. It translates well.
That's right. Well, you do. One day we'll share that video and then people will nod their heads up and down.
You mentioned the 15 years at Apple. Apple was my first large corporate work out of engineering school, actually. And I just landed very luckily into an incredible set of years there. I joined in 2002. I left in 2017. I mean, I can't even talk about the breadth of things I got to work on was incredible, but also the people I got to work with. And a lot of what I learned there was we got stuck all the time, and we had a company, especially when we were struggling and small and trying to figure out, let's make payroll stuff, that we couldn't afford it. We literally just couldn't afford to ship one bad thing. We couldn't afford to have something hang when the company was counting on it. We didn't have the resources. We didn't have a company that could survive it. And so I learned from people at all levels there how to continuously rejigger. And even as, across the 15 years, you could say I worked at 3 or 4 or 5 different Apples. But even as it grew to, one of the largest technology companies in the world, culturally, we kept all of that. And so every product fought for its right to exist continuously. Every endeavor had to be continuously evaluated, justified. Everyone's heard the 1,000 no's for every yes. We were lucky if it was only 1,000. It was a lot of no's. And so, having done some very, very cool stuff there, when I chose to leave, I just didn't see myself going to another company and trying to do that in some way, shape, or form. It was like most big companies that wanted to hire me out of the gate, they already had their culture. And that's fine. That's great. There were successful companies. But what I did learn was that there were companies that needed help during these, as you said, critical moments, these times of expansion. And we try to differentiate that scaling growth versus expansion growth for ourselves. And what I learned was these expansive growth moments are things that break companies. And they do it to large companies. They do it to small companies. Like if you start If you start from your own lens and go back, you can look at, you know, Sears. If you tell it in a reverse order, it's like, oh, Stuck, Plateau, things are good enough. RIM, BlackBerry, right? These companies plateau and think that that's okay. And in fact, they're stuck and when they try to expand, they do these sort of either knee jerk or overly, very excessive moves that cost hundreds of millions of dollars and don't get a result. And you do that a couple of times and it doesn't matter how big you are, right? So when you talk about coming back to your question, the recognizing stuck, in my world, it has a lot to do with what expansion should look like and what it could be, right? A lot of people will know they're stuck if they're not making their goals, right? Sales is a great place to know you're on a plateau, right? You've got numbers, you're not making them. Great, we have a plateau. But sales is an indicator of something, and it's an indicator of something that got you there. And those are the things that, like, you'll find you're stuck through a number of different ways. Digging out those indicators and learning how to either break them down, rewrite them, or maybe they're things that you've chosen to live with and you have to work a different way. But most businesses, especially, more and more now, if you're not expanding, if you're not reaching out and grabbing new things, then you already are going backwards. And that's kind of our definition of stuck.
I think that's really interesting because I have a lot of conversations with people who are in creative lanes of work, whether they're creating artistic works that could be, audio, video, music, craft. And sometimes the creative's definition of stuck, or for a writer, for example, we have this notion of like writer's block, which always cracks me up when I have these conversations with people who consider themselves working in that lane. Like, oh, I just have writer's block, which, we'll end up having a conversation. I go, it's so interesting because you know, the electrician who came to my house because we were installing, I was hoping to have some new outlets installed. They didn't have electrician's block when he showed up. He was an electrician with a capital E. He decided that whatever he was doing today, he was still going to be an electrician. But why do we as creatives think that there is this, do we choose to show up with a capital letter in front of our name, with whatever that is, writer, artist, whatever? And it's interesting because sometimes I hear a response that sounds like, in my world, to be unstuck is to acknowledge that I am just not moving. Therefore, to be creative, another way of framing it is I am just in motion. I am moving. I'm not telling you I'm moving the right way, by the way. I'm just acknowledging that today I am in motion. Yesterday I was not. So I think that's an interesting way, or at least I kind of heard a little bit of a bridge in there where you're saying, hey, maybe someone listening is like, well, I don't have like an Apple-sized team over here. I have this thing over here that's perhaps not at that scale. Um, how could I go do an assessment today as to whether or not I'm in this zone of stuck? Maybe that's one way. You go, well, to what degree are you moving in a way that feels purposeful? And even if that purpose is exploratory, that's okay. Does that make any sense? I feel like I'm trying to sort of connect something that could be a stretch.
No, no, I agree 100%. And, I think it is a creative endeavor planning these things and putting these together, whether you're on the very, very technical sides, the infrastructure side, whatever it is. And simultaneously, I think the purposeful word that you use there is really important because I've worked at Apple on teams, and I've worked in other places where motion is mistaken for progress. Right, and you wanna be very careful about that because it's easy to create motion. A lot of very un and I don't mean this in a mean way, but a lot of people who aren't good at their jobs or aren't in the right jobs are very good at generating motion. Purpose is really, really key, and it's how you'll figure out that you're stuck, is where are we going? What are we trying to achieve? And are we, right? And, more often than not, every company will run into a wall, a hurdle, a hump, whatever word you want to eat, a ditch. That's like, wait, we've slacked on moving towards our purpose, and I think that's the key kind of element.
Yeah, well, one thing on Eric you mentioned before too is like this this kind of like the idea of when you sit down from the strategy and you're starting to plan and like all of these things, like sometimes you mentioned sales as being like a symptom, right? Like the symptom is that the numbers don't look good. The problem isn't necessarily that our sales are bad or our salespeople are bad or our sales strategy is even bad potentially, but there's a symptom that says something's off. We are not headed in the way we want to go. And, and there's a lot of that, right? You look across an organization, like symptoms are lingering around. And I think that, one of the precursors to identifying that you're stuck sometimes is that you're in this just like you're attending to symptoms constantly and you don't really know what's going on. But like there's this focus of like that KPI or that number or this thing or this hope that we had is not coming to fruition. And so we have a symptom of a problem. But so often organizations look at symptoms as the problems and so they miss the fact that like we got to go figure out why sales is doing so terrible. Not are customers happy with the product they bought? Like did we even make the right thing? Like are we solving anybody's material problem out here? Like like are we even giving sales a chance? Like do they have the right materials? Do like all these things, right? Like but oftentimes the knee jerk reaction in organizations of all sizes is to react to a symptom in a way as if like, well, that's our problem, right? Like this is definitely our problem is this, and we have to just go immediately try and attack that problem, which is that I'm addressing a symptom. I don't really know what the problem is. And sometimes I think as you look at stuck, sometimes it's even like, do we even understand what's causing the disruption of our numbers that we're looking at here? And do we know enough about it to take whatever the next step is, right? Like and as you look at organizations and you see people bumping into this, like, is there a good way to change people's focus of being like, "You're really just poking at symptoms over here, guys, like, the underlying problem is much more substantial than this, and you're just not getting there yet."
Yeah, I think so. Some of it has been built into how we all think of like executive roles for 100 years, right? And some of it is companies aren't built to identify like identifying symptoms that aren't in your area of domain sounds like finger pointing and not admitting that you have a problem, right? And that's all dangerous thinking. And I think most people who enjoy this show, are trying to live beyond that world anyway. But recognizing that you live in a company where finding the indicators of what's caused you to end up where you are to create those symptoms is a collaborative process. It's something that, from my perspective and my more recent history, I get a little bit of a free pass because I'm not in the corporate structure. And I get to come in and say, yeah, that's definitely a problem, but let's make sure we're fixing all the things. And I don't want anybody's job, so that all kind of goes a little easier. We're not fighting over anything. But it's hard to look at the things that are hard to change and say they might be the cause. Like you said, Jonathan, that or did we make the right product? Well, that's a really hard thing to go back and undo, right? It's much easier to point at the sales guys and say, call more people, get more leads, right? It's easy to look at marketing and say, we're not getting the analytics. People aren't coming in. We're not getting the inbound. We're not like those things aren't effective enough. That's all easier. It's not easy, but it's easier to fix than unbuilding and rebuilding the product. But, I think coming in from we have to solve core problems. It doesn't have to be necessarily one thing or the other, right? If you've got the product, it's out in the world. If you don't understand the market it's reaching and that product market fit, whatever assumptions you made early on, if you don't understand what's really happening, then you will never solve your sales or marketing problem. That symptom will never get better. And so, some of that people call pivots. I sort of think of them as market refocus. Like I think a pivot is a little more like, we used to build trucks and now we build spaceships or, something like that. I think that, saying, hey, maybe this works really well in another capacity. If you don't sit down and even, if you're not willing to have that conversation because the product is so built, then you're creating your own hurdles and you're going to sit behind them for a good while.
What I think is just equal parts brilliant and probably risky, because people who listen to the show probably hear us beat this drum over and over again. It amazes me consistently how often I think we find ourselves talking about culture adjacent themes and topics when we think we're talking about tactical, like how do I go to work today and do something great? Because so much of what you both just unpacked assumes that you are operating in a place where the culture around you allows you to have these conversations in the first place. And you said it, Aric, a minute ago. You just said we are living on top of a stack of 100 years of what it means to be in an executive mindset. And I know I've personally and certainly been in environments where the role of insert executive title is to kind of absorb information, delegate, disseminate, not necessarily be a, roll up the sleeve, get into it role. And some people feel like if they have achieved that point in their career, that that was the goal. And now I have arrived and therefore I'm off the hook. And that's really what I think we're all kind of saying is like, step one might be, hey guys, team, person, maybe I'm a solo operator, put yourself on the friggin' hook. Put yourself on the hook to deliver something worthwhile. Or what are we doing here? I mean, I'm not trying to go like so meta that we just blow the whole thing up. But I mean, all that stuff, it's so hard for me to not just walk right into those headspaces when we talk about trying to do better work. Because I'm sitting here nodding my head up and down the whole time you're talking. I'm like, boy, I don't know how you get there on day one. And maybe here's the question back to you, Aric, because maybe someone listening is nodding, going, okay, I can kind of relate. Maybe that's interesting. But what would happen if we just airdrop you into a company of 20 people, right? Who's feeling some version of this, but they're not even sure how to articulate it, perhaps. Like, what would you do in the first 30 days? Really just to kind of kick it off. Like, what happens?
Yeah, I think that right before that, a key element, and you're hitting on why we matter, but not necessarily just why we matter. The key thing to recognize when you identify the symptoms and you're admitting to yourself that there might be wider causes is you got to change some things. Right. And I don't mean like start hiring new people or whatever, move teams around. That's kind of the dangerous stuff to do. That's what companies do a lot. And it turns out to be messy and often destructive. I just mean do something different and be very direct and straightforward that we're going to do something different because what we've been doing has got us here. And so, to your point, airdropping us in, that's one thing. But first of all, we're a small team, so we can't help an audience the size of slackers all aboard. There's some people are going to have to do it themselves. But making sure that you understand, like with intent and a real investment, something's got to change, right? And it can be we're going to change how we work. We're going to change meetings. People change all kinds of things. I don't agree with doing that destructively, but you've got to inspire a different way of thinking so that people have room to go do that. And your team will do it. If you were to airdrop our team in, obviously the very first thing we have to do is immersively learn everything we can. The good news is we have a team of like people who have, that's what we do. We've dropped in and we've learned everything from you guys should see the calendar list I've got where I go from like a defense meeting to a fitness meeting to a nutritious meeting to a healthcare devices meeting. It's like we've gotten very good at adopting other people's brilliance and understanding why these companies matter and why what they set out to do matters. And so respecting that and getting, being clear about those things first is really, really important. And a lot of companies kind of forget to codify that stuff, to say what we want to be is this, right? And it's the most important thing. And other things can be important, but let's not forget that. Because then once we're immersed and we're looking at the symptoms, a big part of what we do is just try to dig in and validate what were the assumptions that got us here. And are they good assumptions? Did we do the right thing? Did we make the right choices about those things? And again, that doesn't have to be about rewriting the code base or rebuilding the hardware device, but a lot of assumptions come in, especially in fields where you're creating something that doesn't exist in the world yet. If you're in the market of invention, it's all assumption, right? It starts from an idea of something that doesn't exist that maybe should, but all of those pieces get you to the place where you are, and that's kind of the first thing that we have to do. We have the tools to fix, and so do you. Every company, everyone listening, you have the tools to fix your marketing problem or your sales problem. Like if you have budget, you hire. Like if you have, you can redo websites. You can change the things that are right before the symptoms or right in front of them. Sitting down and really understanding the key elements that drive why they matter and putting them back on that purposeful course, that's hard, right? Even if it's little things that need to be fixed, it's a hard set of things to do, and you got to make a decision to change something to get there.
Without compromising things or naming names, I mean, could you just kind of drill into that a little bit more and maybe tell us about a company or an experience that you walked into where, they thought their problem was X and it turned out it was Y? Like, just maybe riff on that for a second.
Yeah, absolutely. We had a company we worked with for about 4 years, actually, that when we started there, they had developed a very interesting set of technology solutions, that were really, really powerful. Like, early this was 8 years ago, and they had done incredible things with machine learning and AI with regard to vision intelligence, with regard to object identification, stuff that was years ahead of its time. And they had somewhat rightly founded the company around the idea of creating camera technology. And the camera technology was incredibly powerful. When we met that company and started helping out, that camera technology was mostly intended for two markets, and one was cameras, um, at like sort of prosumer level, like things people would spend a good amount of money on, but not quite the mint. Um, but the other that had been identified was mobile, because it's where cameras were going. If you were making cameras and you weren't thinking about mobile, you were fools. The thing that started to happen as we were there is a lot of assumptions had been made about what the mobile market might look like, what the technology landscape might look like, why things would be of value in mobile. And you have this technology that's now looking for its place to fit, right? And mobile is one of those scary markets where there's so many devices sold that if you get a tiny little share, you have a very valuable company, right? But getting that tiny little share means joining an ecosystem that has grown up a certain way and behaves a certain way. And if you don't fit that, you never will. Right. I mean, if you're not going to sell a billion devices if you're not really good at cost down of your technology, right? And if you didn't found your company to cost down, then you're going to hit a wall. In the end, what we stood back and looked at those assumptions and looked at what core values of the capability set were, the things that had been built. Again, we couldn't go back and rebuild this. What were the key capabilities and what was it really, really good at? And within the matter of a couple of years, that company ended up getting bought by John Deere, which makes neither cameras nor mobile devices. um, but they had this perception technology that was really, really valuable and did amazing things to like make farms safer, make our food safer, did like all of these wonderful kind of cool core things that there never would have been a conversation with John Deere. If you sat and you kept trying to say, why aren't we making it in mobile and why aren't we making it in cameras?
I did not have John Deere on my bingo card when you started that story. I'm aware that was gonna land. So that's kinda wild. Like, and John Deere.
The company stayed true to its blood. It stayed true to its core. They built what they were good at, but they had designed to fit a market, a couple of markets that they were never going to fit. Taking that step back without having to rewrite the world opened new doors for us, and it turned into what got bought, and you know turned out to be a pretty valuable set of product and technology.
One thing that reminds me of, and I know, Jamie, you and I talk about this quite a bit on this show even, is the common occurrence of people building a product and then trying to find a customer, or aspiring to enter some part of the market that they don't wholly understand, or whatever the case may be, right? So they build a thing and then like, "Oh, let's go find a home for this thing," which is one of the hardest things to do is to build the thing and then go try and find who the thing is for. Yeah, for those listening, please do it the other way around. Like, figure out who you're building it for and then make it just do that. But oftentimes companies find themselves in a situation that might be similar to what you're talking about, which is that either the thing they built was never built for a customer base in the first place, and so now they're struggling with, well, what do we do with this thing? Because it feels like especially when it's new, right? I'm gonna build a thing that nobody's ever built before, but if I don't solve a problem that a lot of people have, nobody will care that I built this thing in the first place, right? And sometimes, and what I've seen this in a bunch of different industries that are very similar to kind of the story you told, Aric, is just that sometimes the companies need they're facing some kind of an inflection point, Either the market's pushing on them, the technology's pushing on them, their customers are pushing on them, their competitors, whatever it is. They're facing a need to change. And so to your point to call out, one, you got to be kind of ready for that. If you're super resistant to change, these next parts are super hard, right? Because that means you probably got to get burned a few more times until you're ready for change, or you don't have the option to even try anymore, which many companies deal with. But that can be a really valuable thing when you think about, having people come into your organization from with an outsider's perspective, is that so many times people have their blinders on about what we actually do. And you're like, when you really poke at it, you're like, who, for the customers you do have, like, why did they hire you in the first place? Like, why did they even pick you? Like, do you understand that well enough to go build that? And is there enough opportunity for that to be maybe a core strength that I can go serve this segment in some way? Or you maybe did, and that segment kind of dried up, and now you're stuck with, well, now what do I do? Like, I think I built some useful stuff here, but being able to look across, maybe across industries, to the John Deere example, right? Like, is there some way that maybe this translates to a group of customers out there that have a real need that actually really aligns with this technology, but in your current state in your org, it's really hard to connect those dots because it's like I can't see a wide enough landscape to figure out how to apply this thing I built, right? Like, so there's like this transformational challenge for people who are like, I built a thing and I either built it for the wrong customer or that customer is no longer viable, but I don't really have the option to back all the way up. And I was like, well, I'll just go rebuild this thing into some brand new thing. Like, maybe as a company, I don't have that choice. Even when you mentioned earlier, like if somebody's thinking like, man, if companies like Apple are like, we can't miss, like we need home run after home run after home run. Like we can't sit here and strike out. Like that's not an option. Some of these smaller companies are like, man, not only that, but like you have like zero margin for error. Like if you built a thing and you have no option to rebuild it, you have to figure out, like, does it have a place in this world? And if you're way too close to it, or you just don't have enough experience across multiple industries, having that outside vision can really help, right? Like, because I think people kind of undervalue that of just being like, well, they don't understand my business. Oh, these guys aren't in the agriculture tech space or whatever. Like that, and so often I find that really doesn't matter. It's just more about, can we understand what you're good at doing? And are there customers out there that value that? And are you somehow leaning into it? And many companies just aren't.
It's so interesting because I think I'm hearing a couple of consistent things with from both of you guys. One, it sounds like to the degree that an organization even allows for enough slack or space to have the conversations about being able to adjust course, a lot of organizations are are really, really tightly confined where the idea of having just kind of slack built into the system to afford for moments like, hey, we need to have a meeting to discuss whether or not what we're doing here, whether the approach is something that is reasonable. A lot of those meetings don't exist, right? So that's just another way of saying, we get so caught up in the behaviors and the practices that got us to the place that we are today that we believe those are the same practices that will get us to the place we're trying to go tomorrow. And there's a rigidity to that unless somebody in the organization, I don't care who you are, your title, your role, or whatever, but unless somebody can acknowledge that, hey, guys and gals, perhaps that means that we haven't built in enough slack or space in our environment to even consider the broader menu of what we should be applying our energy to, we're going to have a real tough time. And then, and I'm sort of paraphrasing, but it sounded like Aric, you were advocating for some version of, on day one, whatever, we're learning, we're going to do some sort of skills and capabilities assessment, regardless of what business we think we are in. What's the stack of our skills and capabilities? And if we had to go stretch our thinking to live horizontally across industries and find our way to friggin' John Deere or whoever, are we even be able to do that because we have a crisp understanding of our skills and capabilities? And who here amongst us has the creative horsepower to help us see how those might apply and be stretched into like other areas? I don't know if there's a lot of teams that are carving out the time or prioritizing that type of effort or energy. So I just think that's really interesting. And Aric, I mean, I know I want to be mindful of your time because I know, you only have so much to give. But I mean, people who are listening here, if you wanted someone to like take away one thing from this chat, like about what they're gonna do, what they're gonna go back to tell their team or themselves tonight, what could they do to change how they're approaching their work like next week?
Uh, That's an interesting question. Because a lot of, as I said, our process is figuring out where we are before we change a whole lot of things. Like we take the step to make a change and figure out where we are. But I think, there's a lot of different ways that companies go through setting goals, and teams have goals set, and they sort of identify what they're trying to achieve. And I'll even go bigger than goals, just like the total, where are we headed? And what do we think we are at the end of that? And a lot of this applies absolutely equally to new endeavors in large companies as it does to smaller companies, right? It really doesn't matter. The step one would be make sure you know what you're trying to achieve. Like make sure you've identified that in a very clear and crisp way, and don't broaden it out. I'll use an example. Um, some parts of our team do a lot of work in the automotive industry. And that was from the benefit of some very cool work that we've gotten to do with technology companies, but we've gotten tied into, a much wider set of the industry. The automotive industry, we've all been watching, has gone through like a few very disruptive scenes in the last like 10 years. All right. There's autonomy slash not autonomy. There's, driver assist. There was a huge batch of technology that made it into the car. Electric cars sort of lent into that. And that was a massive thing that they fought. I promise I'll come back to your simple answer. And then software defined vehicles and letting the in-vehicle experience and external become more software driven, and, go that space. And now they're also fighting like the transition of artificial intelligence because they've made software defined vehicles and software is being disrupted by artificial intelligence. Well, that's a tough 10 years, right? That's a hell of a ride. Um, and each division in those spaces, as they started to build that, they would build something new inside the company. At least this is our experience. I'm sure it happens in a lot of different ways. There's a lot of car companies. But they'd build a division with an intent to solve whatever it was that was. We want to be more services revenue. We want to get CarPlay out of the car. We want to have a better software defined experience. We want to, unify things in our own entertainment space. All of that. And they build these little companies in a company, and that's their goal, right? And then when they don't reach their goal after, $100 million of expense, they fire that executive and there's a big shakeup. And then they realize they still have to solve the goal. And so they start another big group of people and they do it again. Right. And my argument, back to the simplest, figure out what you're trying to achieve, is none of those little subdivisions were created to achieve the brilliance of whatever, the autonomous control unit, the brilliance of the in-vehicle entertainment system, the brilliance of cloud connected car, or the brilliance of annual recurring revenue via services. They're all there because they're at a car company that's going to try to build something that's the best vehicle experience for the customer and that resonates. And you can rebuild that group 10 times and spend $1 billion. And if you haven't reset and figured out what you're trying to achieve for it large, then you're never going to get there. You're going to keep doing that. So I think that'd be my biggest step one advice. There's a lot of steps twos and threes and stuff. And a lot of this stuff sounds very simple. It sounds very simple to say, make sure you know what you're trying to achieve. And we have a tenet of ours that just because something's simple doesn't mean it's easy. In fact, the best simple things are very, very, very hard. And so, tasking yourself and your team with that. Do we all understand what we're trying to enable? What the customer experience is at the end? And it doesn't matter if honestly you're working in code QA or marketing, designing websites or whatever. If you don't have that vision of that, if what you're trying to achieve is some other set, then you're not going to steps 2, 3, and beyond are just aren't going to matter. You're never going to get there.
That's huge. I mean, that's undoubtedly impactful. Well, it's impactful for me to hear. I mean, it sort of helps to hear that kind of stuff, in your own life in general, which one of the reasons I love doing this show. I mean, it's very for selfish reasons. I just love having conversations with people where you kind of get to these places. It also makes me want to ask you, we've talked obviously about the concepts of being stuck and how to get unstuck in the context of business and work. But, you know, personally, has there been a point just for you personally in your career or your personal life? You've obviously, made transitions in your career that are super interesting. I mean, where you personally just felt stuck? And if you have, like, what did you do? How does everything you just said apply to Aric and keeping Aric moving?
Oh yeah, 100%. And working in Ronin for almost 9 years now, I've tried very hard to fix the problem of the cobbler's children's shoes, right? Where we're so busy helping everyone else that we're not paying attention. The good news from our perspective, or good or bad, is that when things get stuck in our world, it has a very real and immediate material challenge. We're not gonna get customers because we're not addressing a need, right? We've made incorrect assumptions about something, and we get stuck rather quickly, and small companies tend to. Um, but we try very, very hard to be self-aware about those things, right? So one of the things I talked a lot about validating assumptions, and you guys hit a very good topic in one of the earlier episodes about. I'm going to use my words for it. I can't remember exactly what you said, but it's something along the lines of getting out of the echo chamber, right? Like you're in your own sort of perspective view, and it's very important to. I remember it was about empathy, right? You use the word empathy, and for me, it was something about the echo chamber, and I think you guys made a very good point that you are in an echo chamber. Like, don't you wanna try to pretend or do everything you can to be out of it, but you should always assume you're in one, right? And one of the things that we did in Ronin early on was, I come from a very specific background of how I'm used to building product. 15 years at Apple sort of built a very unique. I mean, it's grown a lot into the rest of the world, but it was a very unique place to, like, grow up, in a company. So, I have that echo chamber with me, whether I walk into a company that's working on car technology or working on like next generation cooking. It doesn't matter. I've got my echo chamber. So a good example for that is we started adopting roles in our group called guest stars. And this applies to anyone. Anyone can do this. Like a lot of people phrase this as seek mentors. But the goal is bring in other people who are experts at what they do. Bring them in fractionally. We bring people in on projects for a day, but they're people who have worked on something that, I might think I'm pretty good at, but we get guest stars who are world class at that one thing. And when we get that voice in the room, I think you guys hit some of this with the leaders and how like small input can change things for a long term. You know, the reason we have guest stars in our world is to disrupt our own echo chamber. Like it's our job to break other people's echo chambers. And yet we have a core built into our company to solve that for ourselves because we're guilty. And so getting my world unstuck, getting my career unstuck is having an awareness of like self-awareness of all the things that I'm telling other people to do and pay attention to, and realizing I make the same mistakes and realizing I push the same wrong buttons and have to look back and say, where are we trying to go? Why aren't we there?
I have one thing for you, Eric, and I don't know if you like if you don't want to disclose it, it's fine. So I'm gonna throw it out there. So we talk to plenty of people who listen to the show who kind of span all across the spectrum at work, right? Like I show up and I'm a product manager every day, or I show up on the CEO, or in everything in between, right? So everybody has a different lens, like how they view this stuff, how much influence they have, and all these other things, and in some cases, those of us who aren't the CEO that show up to work every day are, dealing with executive level folks, and we're trying to figure out how to navigate, maybe challenging situations sometimes, or either you aren't aware of either what's going on, or you just don't understand the thought process or whatever. And, in your life, you've worked with some pretty demanding executive folks, maybe some of the most demanding in the history of work. And so, as somebody who's in that environment, when you're not the person who is saying, this is the vision of this company and we are going to do this, and yet you're kind of coming into it as being a contributor to that. How do you feel like you can affect change, or how do you approach when you know you're going up against like, yeah, there's 1,000 no's before I get the yes, and this might be the day that I go get another one, and yet still feel like the grind is worth it and I can contribute here and I can make a difference versus just feeling like, yeah, if you get a yes, it's just flat out lucky and, you might feel like I have very little I can, like, affect as in my role of this organization, yet it does happen all the time, but I think, you might have an interesting perspective is that not all of us have been in an environment where we know at the corporate level, it's extremely rigid and there's a lot of purpose and there's gonna be a lot of, like, "I know what's right," and you're coming in with your thing. How do you kinda negotiate that and maybe some advice to folks who are just like, "Yeah, I kinda feel like when I show up at work, I don't know how I can move the needle really, other than I know we're stuck, but I don't know how to do anything about it."
That's a great question. And yeah, I've sort of fought on both sides of that field, and it's a tough thing to undo. It's like you think you get higher up in a company and have more influence, and therefore you it gets easier to push the company, and those things often just aren't really true. I think the two pieces I would say are have been really helpful to me for that. And it's not like I sit in every room and I've thrown something out, even, certainly not in the time at Apple, throw something out and everybody's like, great idea. We hadn't thought of that. Let's get started. Right. Like that's not the process at all. And so the two sides are one, when I'm talking about all of this stuff, identifying what you're trying to achieve, chasing core goals, recognizing assumptions, validating them. Um, This is a very flexible way of thinking, right? This has to be loosely held belief. Is like these are questions before they become answers. And I think people who drive into a room and think they've solved it or think they have their preformed opinion to, we're doing this and it's wrong. And if we don't change it, we're broken. You know, there's history is written with the litter of the people who kind of approached a problem that way. And whether they were right or wrong, didn't get anything done. And so I think the flexibility of asking questions of, are we recognizing this? Are we sure? How do we know? How did we know? And then the counter side to that is, and this speaks to people working up in career. The best technique I learned, and it was, I won't say beaten into me, but it was drilled in quite a bit in my career, was be very prepared. Like when you want to propose something, when you want to identify something, when you want to say this, maybe this is wrong, maybe this needs change, right? There's nothing better, and it's so much easier to do now than it used to be. There's nothing better than having done some research. How could you be wrong, right? Be ready to back it up, and then you don't have to come into the room and give people a deluge of your thoughts on topic X. You can come into the room and ask a flexible question, but when it gets nudged, pushed back, maybe, I don't think that's the problem. You're kind of ready to go. You understand more information than just that piece. And, again, doing your homework sounds simple. It's hard, right? But the more you do that, the more respect you'll get for the questions you ask, and you'll reach a better conversation. And if you don't, those are some of the places where maybe there are better places to work. But giving them that chance, I think, is worthwhile. Is like come in, be flexible, open thinking, but have done your homework for the things that you're coming for. Because otherwise, you know, if a company's lost chasing squirrels, we don't need to throw out more squirrels. Like that's not going to fix the problem.
I love that. I mean, gosh, the number of times, I found myself in a meeting or been a part of a conversation where just if you were measuring what the output of that meeting or that conversation was, and you had to reverse engineer, like, what's the purpose of this meeting? You would think that the purpose was, I think this organization just has an ideas problem. That's clear. At least that's how we're behaving, right? Like that's the core thing. The reason we're not hitting the number and the thing's not moving up to the right is because we just don't have enough ideas. So let's all sit around and do that. And that's almost never the thing. But boy, your point about being prepared, it's so critical. And you're right. It's never been easier to be prepared. And in fact, I would argue the real challenge is like, are you curious in the first place? And if you're curious, then you're going to ask questions. It's like we want people who make assertions inside the organization to challenge things. We want assertions to be put in front of us to consider. But who's showing up being curious about what those should be in the first place? Which I think that assumes a certain level of purposeful, intentional empathy for the people you're trying to serve in the first place. Because if you're just showing up because, yeah, the paycheck comes in the mail every 2 weeks and someone put a set of instructions on my desk today that I'm supposed to go do this thing, we might have different problems, to begin with. But I don't think that's who's listening to this show, and certainly not what we're advocating for. But we're out here trying to figure out how to just do better work because, boy, and yeah, you said it a second ago, there's never been a better opportunity or moment in time that if you just show up to the work that you do and just want to directionally move towards better, wow, now's a pretty great time to be alive to do that if you choose to sign up for that, journey. Um, we've spent a lot of time talking about the unstuck piece of it. And I wonder if Eric, briefly, you could kind of just riff on, okay, what does it look like or feel like inside an organization or a team when it's humming, when it's working, and you're going, yeah, this is actually it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. Like, what does that feel like? What does that look like? What are some of the artifacts of, yep, check, 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 check. Let's pour gas on this thing because we're humming.
I'll jokingly say before you start, Eric, I wouldn't be surprised if there's people listening be like, I can't wait to hear this because I have never experienced this in my life.
It's a very selfish question. I'm not saying. I'll put that out there.
And fair enough to hit me with it, because if I say that's our product, then I probably should be able to describe it.
Or it's the therapy of me being like, Eric, tell me it's going to be okay. Just when will I know it's going to be okay?
Well, so some of this has to do with where our approach goes. Is whether we're working with a very very young company, we're building something for the first time, or we're working with a company where again it's a division that has been tasked within a massive organization. When we identify the things that we want to adjust, one of the things that we do is we're very clear about what we intend to achieve. Right. Like this goes back to what are we as a company trying to achieve? Well, we're not going to just change things because we think we have a better idea. We're going to pre-validate that stuff. We're going to have success metrics. Right. And companies do this in some interesting ways. A lot of them get done sort of, they're either too low level or too high level. And I think the short answer is you should have a very clear path of where you want to be. And then it gets a lot easier to spot success, right? And if you make change and you're just flailing, you'll recognize that because you don't have clear markers for success. Better is the answer, right? If we're better, if we're making more money, we're shipping product faster, our code is cleaner, whatever that is, better is a terrible metric, right? And so the trick of that to me is a well-run organization that knows that they're making progress and achieving forward is one where they can clearly look at the things they meant to achieve and mark them off, right? And if you can't mark them off, know why you can't mark them off. And if you have to adjust, adjust. Like those teams feel nimble, right? And this goes back to every conversation. I try to keep the word Apple down to like one. But working around the executive team that I got to come up under in that world, it was incredible to see how good they were at like being driven and nimble at the same time and understanding like successes and failures and blockers and all those things and being adaptive to that. And if you feel that way, you're probably doing something right. And if you feel like when you hit a bump, everything kind of goes to pot, then you're fighting a different battle, right? Like good, wonderful, strong business teams recognize when they are or aren't making their goals and are adaptive to that process. And that hum, when you get it, when you get a team like that, those are the places you will hear people tell stories of working somewhere like that for the rest of their life.
I don't know how you did it, but the fact that you could land the plane on that topic with birds sort of singing in the background there, I mean, I assume that's just part of the the package and presentation of And by the way, when you know it's working, the birds sing and everything in the world sounds brilliant. That was the most fantastic just collision of things in the natural environment I've ever, heard on the show. For those listening, Eric just has birds that follow him around. The minute he hits his stride, they kick in, and that's how you know it's working. That was awesome. Eric, thank you so much for being here today. We're grateful for your time, incredibly grateful for the work that you do. If people want to learn more about you and the work that you do, where can they find you online?
We are at Ronin.inc. That's .ink. If we're hard to find, it's a big failing of my my work. But yeah, you can find us at ronin.ink. We're also very open and accessible on LinkedIn and easy to hunt down. So feel free to reach out. We like meeting smart, cool people, finding out what they're working on. If we can help, we can help. If people we know can help, that's always fun too. And otherwise, we just know more cool, smart people for the next time.
Brilliant. That sounds like a plan. Thank you, Eric. Thanks for being here. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, guys. I really enjoyed it. You guys do a great show. Keep it up.
Okay. Well, that was Eric Marshall. That was awesome. That was awesome. I mean, Eric had an incredible amount of value to give. Those were great stories. I mean, I feel like I learned something. One, just what a good dude, right? That's an easy conversation to have. But I mean, if you got to this point of the show, you just heard all that stuff. It's like, Jonathan, man, I mean, okay, so what? Like, what am I supposed to do tomorrow, next week with all of that?
Yeah, that was fun. It's always good to hear from people, especially, folks like Eric who are kind of in that unique position where it's like, on one hand, he spent, 15 years working at Apple, a brand all of us know, right? Like that we're very familiar with their products and as a customer, how that works. So it's kind of fun to listen to people talk who absolutely were involved in probably products you've used a lot in your life, right? Like, so sometimes it's very easy to kind of put yourself in that lane. But, a lot of what we talk about there is around being stuck and getting unstuck, that's certainly the theme of what we're talking about here. And I think, where Eric kind of leaned into in a lot of places is this, at different levels of your organization, obviously a lot of folks, if you're listening, you might be at the top or in the middle or wherever you land in the org and trying to feel like, well, what's my role in identifying being stuck and putting us on a path to getting unstuck. And like we mentioned on, early in the, as we we're talking, is that sometimes just identifying if you're stuck or not I mean, it's really step one. Like sometimes we feel stuck and we're not sure, or maybe it feels like things are kind of going okay, but we're really stuck. And I think Eric's one thing he framed around that I think is good for everybody to kind of lean into is this like, are you building towards like an expansion? Like, are you trying to grow? Are you trying to, delight more people? Are you trying to kind of like enter another market space with your tools and the things, your capabilities that you have? Or are you kind of treading water, just continuing down the path that you've been on for a long time? And if you're in the latter, sometimes it's hard to tell. Like, am I stuck or are we just kind of in cruise control? Like this is maybe okay. Like going down the freeway at 60 miles an hour constantly might be fine, right? It might be fine. But being able to distinguish between that and being stuck is really important, right? It's just like, yeah, I might be in cruise control, but am I going to get to my destination on time? Like, am I going to get there on time? Or am I just kind of like just rolling along down the road, realizing that I'm going to get there 2 days late because I didn't have a better plan or whatever other analogy you might throw in there. So I think expanding, building for growth, like looking to like do bigger, better, more means that you're striving to be uncomfortable, to try new things, to find another path to growth or success or delighting customers. And so it's like looking for that way to kind of bend the curve upwards is a way of kind of addressing the fact that you might be stuck, right? Like your curve's not going up on its own. And so you've got to figure out like, what do we got to do to make that happen? And, finding that place of being like, when do I know that like just being in cruise control actually means I'm stuck? Because sometimes it's not very acute. Like you don't necessarily feel it quite as strong as when you are dead stopped and you are absolutely stuck. That's pretty acute. You realize like we are making no forward progress. This is a problem. But I thought Eric's point about if you also aren't growing and expanding, you've hit a plateau that might indicate you're stuck or that you're about to be stuck, right? Like, so those are good, like caution flags to look for. If you're not in that growth mode, then are you potentially stuck or about to be stuck? So I think that's important stuff for anybody in the org. But as far as like what you can do, some of this, I also thought Eric's advice on just being prepared, right? Like, so when you show up at the meeting to talk about are we stuck or not, right? Like you have to have looked at this from as many angles as possible, right? You can't just go in with one idea or one theory and be like, well, this is the one idea I have. So let's all just lean into this because I'm the smartest guy in the room. Like, one, that almost never works, but it disenfranchises the team. It overstates kind of the role of the stakeholder in the room, whose real job is to be like, if you're at the top, your job is really to go in there and be like, it appears that we're stuck, or we might be about to be stuck. I need everyone in this room to rally around, that idea. And here's why I can frame up why we might be stuck or why things aren't going as well as they can be. But now it's time to start getting everybody focused on like, what do we do? And this is where, as a team member at any level of the organization, you're going to have some insight into like, what would make my job better? What would make our customers' lives better? Like, what would make these products be more appropriate for the people we're building them for, or taking them to market in a better way? You're going to see that, and just I think, again, going back to some of Eric's comments, and where I think there's some real sharp opportunities here is, don't just show up in the meeting with a complaint, right? Like that's a super common thing. It's like, this is broken, or I don't like this, or our customers constantly complain about this, so I'm going to put that on the whiteboard. We're like, well, okay, that's fine, but so what? Like, so what do you do? So bring solutions. So if you can do a thing, it's if your team hasn't identified that you're stuck yet, take a look around. If you're feeling stuck, be able to showcase that. I believe we are stuck because of this. I have plenty of evidence to back this up. I think there's some things we should all need to talk about here. And at any level of organization, you can start that conversation. And as long as you're in the right culture that accepts that. And then from there, it's like, yeah, we can all agree that we're stuck now. Now we're in this mode. And so what do we do to get unstuck? And, I think you brought this up. Aric touched on it, is this ability one, I think we can all conclude there's not one person in this room that has all the answers, or we wouldn't be sitting here talking about it in the first place. So let's all get that aside. Nobody's sitting here with all the answers right now. And yet we have to kind of address like, what are the symptoms? What might those be symptoms of? What things can we each bring to the table to start solving some of the real problems so we can start making the symptoms go away so that we can start growing? But any person in the org, be thinking about that way, which is like, look, are you stuck? Can you identify that? Can you back it up with enough research and preparedness, and so that you show up with thoughtfulness and not just complaints, and that at whatever organization level you're at, getting it on the table, starting the conversation, setting aside egos, starting to poke at the challenges, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. I think that's a great thing to throw out there, which is like, and do not be wholly dependent on one information gatekeeper who presumably knows everything. Because if that's the case, you wouldn't be sitting down and trying to solve the problem in the first place.
Absolutely. I think one of my takeaways, Aric said it a few times, was, and we've heard this before, just because it's simple doesn't mean it's easy, right? And of course, we know that. I think a lot of us, maybe even listening, know. You kind of nod your head up and down at that one. Of course, I get it. Simple doesn't mean easy. But it doesn't mean that we as individuals, regardless of where we sit in the food chain in our organizations or workplace environment, can't do the simple task of carving out space to allow ourselves to go to those other places mentally and to explore the notion of, am I stuck? Are we? We have to have time to do that. We have to give ourselves the space to even consider that stuff in the first place. And I think it's worth noting, and it was one of my takeaways in the conversation, was you might be on a path where cruise control is okay. That things are kind of, maybe they're kind of working, and cruise control kind of is all right at this moment in time because things are kind of flowing, and there's nothing, maybe it's not such a bad thing to be on cruise control and to be on sort of a glide path that makes sense for the business at this moment in time. But even if you are in that state, it is worth acknowledging that you are always going to be up against the ratchet of progress, of technological change and innovation, of just the ratchet of capitalism kind of moving things forward. You might be on cruise control on the highway, pointed to the place you're supposed to be pointed to, and the road will certainly change under you at some point. So even if it's humming and it's working and you're kind of in flow, it is still worth considering the value of making space to ask yourself what stuck might look like or feel like. And to your point about being prepared, absolutely. We don't want to just show up with the problem. We want to make some assertions as people on a team or part of an organization. So make some assertions, which means ask questions, be curious. I love that. Anyway, grateful for his time and the conversation. Jonathan, it's always good to see you, man. If you have any questions about what we talked about, make sure you check the show notes. There are links to Aric's work, to Ronan, to my work, to Jonathan's work. We'd love to hear from you, as always. I'm Jamie.
I'm Jonathan.
This is Slackers. Thank you so much for being here. We'll talk to you soon.